The locomotive's whistle pierced the autumn air one final time before the train lurched forward, belching black smoke into the gray Wyoming sky. Eliza Turner stood frozen on the wooden platform, her worn canvas bag clutched against her chest, watching the iron beast disappear into the horizon. The year was 1885, and she had just become another abandoned mail-order bride. The wind whipped at her threadbare shawl, sending dried leaves skittering across the platform like tiny ghosts. Around her, the few townspeople who'd witnessed her arrival began to disperse, their whispers cutting through the cold air sharper than any blade. "Another one left standing at the station," muttered Mrs. Henderson, the general store owner's wife, loud enough for Eliza to hear. "You'd think they'd learn by now." "Mail-order bride, wasn't she?" her companion replied, shaking her head. "Third one this year. These men send for wives, then change their minds when reality shows up instead of some fairy tale." Eliza's fingers tightened on her bag until her knuckles turned white. She wanted to tell them that James McKinnon had written her 14 letters, each one filled with promises of a small ranch, a good life, and respectful companionship. She wanted to explain how she'd sold everything she owned in Chicago, her mother's silver comb, her father's pocket watch, even her winter coat, just to afford the train fare. But her throat constricted, and no words came. The platform emptied quickly, leaving her alone with the settling dust and fading smoke. She sank onto the rough wooden bench, her legs suddenly unable to support the weight of her disappointment. This wasn't supposed to happen again, not after Boston, not after Philadelphia, not after St. Louis. 3 times before. She'd answered advertisements for wives. 3 times before. She'd been rejected upon arrival. The first man had taken one look at her copper-tinted skin and high cheekbones, gifts from her Cheyenne mother, and declared he'd been deceived. The second had been more polite, claiming urgent business had called him away, though she'd seen him drinking in the saloon not 2 hours later. The third hadn't even shown up. And now, James McKinnon, who'd seemed so different in his letters, so accepting when she'd honestly written about her mixed heritage, had done the same. Eliza touched the small leather pouch hidden beneath her collar, feeling the smooth river stone inside, her mother's protection charm. "Maheo watches over all his children," her mother used to say, using the Cheyenne name for the Great Spirit, but if Maheo was watching, he seemed content to let her suffer. The sun slipped lower, painting the endless prairie in shades of amber and rust. The small town of Cedar Ridge sprawled before her, a handful of weather-beaten buildings huddled against the vastness of the frontier. The Lucky Dollar Saloon spilled yellow light and raucous laughter onto the dirt street. The general store's windows glowed softly. Somewhere, a dog barked. She had 17 cents in her purse. Not enough for a room at the boarding house she'd spotted near the station. Not enough for a meal. Barely enough for a cup of coffee. If she could bring herself to enter an establishment where she'd surely be stared at, whispered about, judged. The wind picked up, carrying the scent of coming snow. October in Wyoming was unpredictable. She'd been warned. She pulled her shawl tighter, though it did little against the cold seeping into her bones. "Ma'am?" A gruff voice made her look up. The station master, an elderly man with kind eyes beneath bushy brows, stood before her. "Station's closing for the night. You got somewhere to go?" Eliza straightened her spine, summoning what dignity remained. "I'm waiting for someone," she lied smoothly. "He must have been delayed." The old man's expression softened with pity, which was somehow worse than contempt. "Well, can't let you wait here all night. There's a bench outside the church down the way. Pastor Williams don't mind folks resting there when needed." A church bench. She'd slept on worse during her journey west. "Thank you," she managed. He hesitated, then reached into his vest pocket. "Here," he said, pressing something into her hand. "My wife runs the boarding house. This'll get you breakfast in the morning, at least." She looked down at the meal ticket, tears threatening. Such unexpected kindness always undid her more than cruelty. "I couldn't." "You could and you will," he said firmly. Seen too many folks come through this station running from something or running to something. Either way, they all need a meal. He tipped his cap and shuffled away before she could protest further. Alone again. Eliza stood and gathered her courage along with her bag. The church wasn't far, but each step felt like a mile. People watched from windows and doorways as she passed. A woman alone was always a curiosity. A woman alone with native features was a scandal. The bench beside the small white church was hard and cold, but it was sheltered from the worst of the wind. Eliza settled herself as comfortably as possible, using her bag as a pillow. Above her, the first stars began to appear in the darkening sky. She thought of the life she'd left behind in Chicago, working in the textile factory, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week, her lungs filling with cotton dust, her fingers bleeding from the needles. She thought of the tiny room she'd shared with 3 other women, the constant hunger, the way men looked at her like she was something exotic and available. The marriage advertisement had seemed like deliverance. Seeking respectable woman for companionship in marriage must be hardworking, gentle disposition, willing to help establish homestead, mixed heritage, no impediment. James McKinnon, Cedar Ridge, Wyoming Territory. Those words, mixed heritage, no impediment, had made her heart soar. Finally, someone who wouldn't see her as less than whole, but she should have known better. 27 years of life had taught her that people's words on paper rarely matched their actions in person. Her Irish father had loved her Cheyenne mother enough to marry her, but not enough to stop drinking himself to death when the neighbors' contempt became too much to bear. Her mother had loved her enough to teach her the old ways, the healing herbs and sacred stories, but not enough to fight the consumption that took her when Eliza was 15. Since then, Eliza had been neither white enough nor native enough for anyone's comfort, including her own. A child's laughter drifted from somewhere in the darkness, followed by a woman's gentle scolding, the sounds of family, of belonging, of home. Eliza closed her eyes against the ache in her chest. Tomorrow, she would use the meal ticket and then… what? She had no money for a return ticket. Not that she had anywhere to return to. Perhaps she could find work, washing, mending, anything. Maybe in a larger town where her features might draw less notice. Maybe further west, to California, where she'd heard people cared less about bloodlines and more about gold. Or maybe this was where her story ended, on a church bench in a town that didn't want her, waiting for a man who'd never intended to claim her. The tears came then, silent and bitter. She pressed her face into her bag to muffle any sound. She'd learned long ago that crying accomplished nothing, but sometimes the body insisted on its grief regardless of the mind's discipline. The wind howled across the prairie, and somewhere in the distance, a coyote answered. Eliza pulled her feet up onto the bench, making herself as small as possible. The cold seeped deeper, and she knew it would be a long night. Tomorrow seemed impossibly far away. She didn't pray, hadn't since her mother died, but she found herself whispering into the darkness anyway. Please, just once, let someone see me as enough. Let someone need me the way I am. The stars offered no answer, only their distant, indifferent light. Eliza closed her eyes and tried to find sleep, unaware that tomorrow would bring a small voice, a desperate plea, and the beginning of everything she'd stopped believing in. For now, though, she was just another unwanted woman on the frontier, carrying too much past and too little hope, waiting for a dawn that promised nothing but more of the same. Dawn came slowly to Cedar Ridge, painting the sky in pale shades of pink and gold. Eliza woke stiff and cold, her body aching from the hard bench. Frost covered her shawl like tiny diamonds, and her breath came in small white clouds. She sat up slowly, working, feeling back into her numb fingers and toes. The town was just beginning to stir. Smoke rose from chimneys, and she could hear the distant clang of the blacksmith's hammer. Her stomach cramped with hunger, reminding her of the meal ticket tucked safely in her pocket. But first, she needed to make herself presentable, even at her lowest. Her mother had taught her to maintain dignity. She found the pump behind the church and washed her face with the icy water, gasping at the cold. her dark hair, which had come loose during the night. She rebraided and pinned as neatly as she could without a mirror. Her dress, wrinkled from travel and sleeping rough, she smoothed as best she could. There was nothing to be done about the shadows under her eyes or the hollow look of someone who'd had too many hopes crushed. The boarding house was easy to find, a 2-story building with Mrs. Coleman's respectable lodgings, painted in neat letters above the door. Eliza hesitated before entering, steeling herself for the stares and whispers that always followed her. The dining room was warm and smelled of coffee and bacon. Several men sat at long tables, most of them ranch hands or railroad workers by the look of them. Conversation stopped when she entered. She kept her eyes down and made her way to an empty table in the corner. Mrs. Coleman, a plump woman with graying hair, approached with surprising kindness. "You must be the young lady my Henry mentioned," she said quietly. "Sit yourself down. Dear, I'll bring you something hot." The breakfast was simple but generous: eggs, bacon, biscuits with gravy, and strong black coffee. Eliza ate slowly, savoring each bite, not knowing when she'd eat again. She was so focused on her meal that she didn't notice the small figure approaching until a tiny hand tugged at her sleeve. "Are you sad?" Eliza looked down into the biggest brown eyes she'd ever seen. A little girl, perhaps 4 years old, stood beside her table. She had wheat-colored hair that hung in uneven braids and wore a dress that was clean but patched in several places. There was something in her solemn expression that spoke of a sadness too deep for such a young child. Eliza glanced around, looking for the child's parents, but no one seemed to be paying attention. "I'm just tired from traveling." The girl climbed onto the bench beside her without invitation. "I get sad sometimes too," she said matter-of-factly. "Papa says it's because I miss Mama, but I don't remember her much. She went to heaven when I was little." Eliza's heart constricted. "I'm sorry about your Mama." "Me too." The child studied her with that unnervingly direct gaze children have. "You're pretty. Your skin is like honey, Mrs. Garrett says you must be Indian, but I think you look like a princess from Papa's stories." Heat flooded Eliza's cheeks. "Where's your Papa?" "Outside with the wagon. He's trying to fix the wheel. It broke yesterday." The girl scooted closer. "My name's Annie. Annie Hale. What's yours?" "Eliza. That's pretty too." Annie reached out and touched Eliza's hand with her small fingers. "Your hands are soft, not like Papa's. His are all rough and scratchy." "Annie!" a deep voice called from the doorway. "Annie, where did you—" "There you are." Eliza looked up to see a man filling the doorway, and her breath caught. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of stubble on his jaw. His clothes were those of a working man, worn but clean denim trousers, a flannel shirt, heavy boots caked with mud. But it was his eyes that held her attention, gray as a winter storm and filled with a weariness that matched her own. "Papa!" Annie jumped up. "I found a lady. She's sad like us." The man's weathered face flushed. "Annie, you can't just bother folks while they're eating." His gaze met Eliza's briefly before sliding away. "My apologies, ma'am. She hasn't quite learned about not talking to strangers." "She was no bother," Eliza said softly. "She's a sweet child." Something shifted in his expression. Surprise, perhaps, that she hadn't been offended. He moved into the room, his large frame somehow careful, as if he was used to navigating around small, breakable things. "Can she come home with us, Papa?" Annie asked suddenly. "She doesn't have anywhere to go. I heard Mrs. Coleman telling Mrs. Garrett." The silence that followed was excruciating. Eliza wished the floor would open and swallow her whole. The man, Thomas Hale, she assumed, looked mortified. "Annie, that's not— you can't just invite people." "But Papa, look at her. She's all alone." Annie's voice dropped to a whisper that carried clearly in the quiet room. "Maybe she could be my Mama. You said God works in mysterious ways." Eliza closed her eyes, unable to bear the pity she knew she'd see on his face. This was worse than the whispers, worse than the rejection. To have her desperation laid bare by an innocent child. I should go, she said, starting to rise. Wait! His voice was gruff, but not unkind. Please, ma'am, finish your breakfast. Annie, come here. But Annie had grabbed Eliza's hand with both of hers. Please don't go. Sometimes Papa makes biscuits, but they're hard as rocks, and he doesn't know how to braid hair proper. And I don't have anyone to sing to me at night. Annie, enough! Thomas's voice was firm, but gentle. He looked at Eliza, really looked at her for the first time, and she saw him taking in her travel-worn dress, her mixed features, the bag that obviously held all her worldly possessions. I'm sorry. She lost her mother 2 years ago. Sometimes she gets notions. I understand, Eliza said quietly. She gently extracted her hand from Annie's grip. I lost my mother too when I was young. Annie's eyes went wide. You did? Did it hurt your heart? Yes, Eliza whispered. It hurt my heart very much. Mine too, Annie said solemnly. Then, with a sudden shift of childhood, do you know any songs? Annie. Thomas warned, but Eliza found herself answering, I know a few. My mother used to sing to me. Indian songs? Annie asked with innocent curiosity. Thomas made a strangled sound. Annie Marie Hale. It's all right, Eliza said, though her chest tightened. Yes, some were Cheyenne songs. Some were Irish ballads from my father. Could you teach me one? Annie's eagerness was like sunlight breaking through clouds. Please, just one. I don't think, Eliza began. We should let the lady finish her meal in peace. Thomas interrupted. He reached for Annie, but she dodged him with the agility of a child used to getting her way. But Papa, what if she leaves and I never see her again? What if she gets on the train like the others? The others. Eliza wondered how many women had passed through this station, this town, breaking this little girl's heart with their leaving. Thomas's jaw tightened. Annie, we talked about this. We can't keep asking every woman we meet to come home with us. But this one's different, Annie insisted. She's sad like us. She needs a family too. The words hung in the air like a challenge. Eliza saw Thomas struggling, saw the war between propriety and something else, perhaps compassion, perhaps simple exhaustion with fighting his daughter's needs. Mrs. Coleman appeared then, coffee pot in hand. More coffee, dear, she asked Eliza, but her eyes were on Thomas. Tom Hale, that wheel giving you trouble? Yes, ma'am, cracked clean through. Watson's fixing it now. That'll take hours. Mrs. Coleman said, you and Annie might as well sit and have some breakfast while you wait. We already ate. Papa's stomach was growling all through the night. Annie announced, he gave me his supper again. Thomas's face darkened with embarrassment. Annie, Mrs. Coleman tisked. Tom Hale, you can't work on an empty stomach. Sit down, both of you. Breakfast is on the house. Payment for that rocking chair you fixed last month. Before Thomas could protest further, Mrs. Coleman had bustled away. He stood awkwardly for a moment, then slowly took the seat across from Eliza. Annie immediately scooted closer to Eliza, as if afraid she might disappear. I apologize for my daughter, Thomas said quietly. And for this, he gestured vaguely at the situation. There's nothing to apologize for, Eliza replied. She's just a child who misses her mother. Still, it's not right, her approaching strangers. He trailed off, his calloused hands wrapping around the coffee cup Mrs. Coleman set before him. An uncomfortable silence settled over the table. Annie filled it with chatter, telling Eliza about their farm, their chickens, the calf that had been born last week. Thomas ate mechanically, occasionally shooting his daughter warning glances that she cheerfully ignored. Do you really not have anywhere to go? Annie asked suddenly, with that devastating directness of children. Annie! Thomas's voice was sharp now, but Eliza found herself answering honestly. No, I was supposed to meet someone here, but plans changed. Mail order bride, Thomas asked quietly, then immediately looked as if he wished he could take the words back. Sorry, none of my business. Yes, Eliza admitted, There was no point in pretending otherwise. The whole town probably knew by now. Annie looked confused. What's a mail-order bride? Someone who travels a long way to get married. Thomas explained carefully. But where's the man she's supposed to marry? He decided not to come, Eliza said. Annie's face scrunched up in indignation. That's mean. That's like promising someone a present and then taking it away. Despite everything, Eliza felt her lips twitch. Yes, I suppose it is. Well, then he's stupid. Annie declared. You're nice and pretty and you smell good. Not like Papa. He smells like horses mostly. Annie Marie! But Eliza found herself laughing. Actually laughing, for the first time in weeks. It was rusty and small, but real. Annie beamed as if she'd accomplished something wonderful. Then, with the single-minded determination of a child who's found something she wants, she looked at her father. Papa, can she come home with us, just for a little while? Until she figures out where to go. Annie, we can't just... Please, Papa. You always say we should help folks in need, and she's in need, and I'm in need too. I need... She paused, searching for words. I need a mama person. Not forever if she doesn't want, just for now. Eliza watched Thomas struggle, saw the moment his defenses crumbled. He looked at her, really looked at her, and she saw not pity but understanding. We have a small place, he said slowly. Nothing fancy, about 5 miles outside town. You'd have your own room. It's not much. Used to be my wife's sewing room. If you need a place to stay for a few days, until you figure things out. Please say yes, Annie whispered, clutching Eliza's hand again. Please? Eliza looked between them, this grieving father and his motherless child, and felt something crack open inside her chest. It wasn't hope. Exactly. She'd learned not to hope, but it was possibility. I wouldn't want to impose, she said carefully. You wouldn't be. Thomas said, Truth is, Annie's right. She does need, well, she needs more than I can give her. Even if it's just for a few days. Having another woman around might do her good. I could help, Eliza found herself saying, with cooking and cleaning. To earn my keep. Can you make biscuits? Annie asked urgently. Real ones, not Papa's rock ones? Yes, Eliza said softly. I can make biscuits. Annie turned to her father with triumph in her eyes. See, she can make biscuits! Thomas almost smiled. Eliza could see it fighting to break through his serious expression. Well, then, I suppose that settles it. And somehow, it did. Within an hour, Eliza found herself sitting beside Thomas on the wagon seat. Annie wedged between them, chattering about everything and nothing. The broken wheel had been fixed. Her meager bag was in the back. And they were heading away from town toward an uncertain future. That one. Annie pointed at a cloud. That one looks like a rabbit. I see it, Eliza said, and was surprised to find she actually did. Thomas said little, concentrating on driving, but once or twice Eliza caught him glancing at her with something like wonder, as if he couldn't quite believe she was there. She couldn't quite believe it either. Yesterday she'd been alone, unwanted, with nowhere to go. Today she was riding through the Wyoming prairie with strangers who'd offered her shelter for no reason other than kindness and a little girl's need. Will you teach me a song now? Annie asked. One your mama taught you? Eliza hesitated, then began to hum softly, an old Cheyenne lullaby about stars watching over sleeping children. Annie listened with rapt attention, her small body swaying slightly with the rhythm. That's pretty, she sighed when Eliza finished. Will you teach me the words? Maybe later, Eliza said, when we get to your home. Our home, Annie corrected firmly. It's our home now. Thomas made that strangled sound again, but didn't correct his daughter. And Eliza, sitting on that hard wagon seat with the wind in her face and a child's hand in hers, felt the first stirring of something she'd thought was dead. Not quite hope, not yet, but maybe, just maybe, the beginning of belonging. The Hale homestead appeared as they crested a small hill, a modest wooden house with a pitched roof and a chimney releasing a thin trail of smoke into the afternoon sky. It sat in a valley protected by cottonwoods, with a barn, a chicken coop, and a small vegetable garden that had seen better days. Mountains rose in the distance, their peaks already dusted with early snow. "There it is!" Annie bounced on the wagon seat. "Home! See the big tree? That's where Mama planted flowers. They don't grow so good now." Thomas's hands tightened imperceptibly on the reins. "Annie, why don't you run ahead and make sure the chickens have water?" "But I want to show Miss Eliza everything." "You can show her after she's had a chance to settle in. Go on now." Annie jumped down from the wagon before it had completely stopped and ran toward the chicken coop, her braids flying behind her. Thomas pulled up near the front porch and set the brake. "It's not much," he said quietly, not quite meeting Eliza's eyes. "Built it myself 6 years ago when Sarah and I first married. Always meant to add on, make it bigger, but—" He trailed off. "It's lovely," Eliza said, and meant it. After nights on trains and that cold bench, the simple house looked like a palace. "You built it well. The corners are true and the roof looks sound." He glanced at her, surprised. You know construction?" "My father worked as a carpenter sometimes, between other jobs. I used to watch him." Thomas climbed down and came around to help her from the wagon. His hands were careful, respectful, barely touching her waist as he lifted her down. "I'll get your bag." Eliza followed him up the 3 steps to the porch. The boards creaked but felt solid underfoot. Thomas opened the door and stepped aside to let her enter first. The house was one large room divided into sections by furniture placement and function. To the left was the kitchen area with a cast-iron stove, a dry sink, and a table with 3 chairs, one notably smaller than the others. Straight ahead was a living space with 2 rocking chairs before a stone fireplace, a braided rug on the floor. To the right, a ladder led to what must be a loft, and 2 doors stood closed. Bedrooms, she assumed. Everything was clean, but had the indefinable air of a house kept by someone who didn't quite know how to make it a home. There were no curtains on the windows, no tablecloth, no cushions on the chairs. But on the mantel sat a silver-framed photograph of a woman with kind eyes and Annie's smile. "That was Sarah," Thomas said unnecessarily. "Annie favors her. She was beautiful," Eliza said softly. "She was." He cleared his throat. "Let me show you the room. Like I said, it's small." He opened one of the doors to reveal a tiny room with a narrow bed, a washstand, and hooks on the wall for clothes. A small window looked out toward the mountains. In the corner sat a rocking chair with a half-finished quilt draped over its arm. "Sarah liked to sew in here," Thomas explained. "Good light in the afternoons. There's bedding in the trunk. I'll bring in water for the pitcher." Eliza set her bag on the bed, running her hand over the quilt's soft fabric. The pattern was wedding rings, done in blues and yellows. Did she make this? Started it just before. He stopped. "Never got to finish it. I kept meaning to pack it away, but Annie likes to come in here sometimes. Says it still smells like her mama." The raw pain in his voice made Eliza's chest tight. "I won't disturb anything. No, it's fine. Room needs using." He shifted awkwardly. "I'll let you get settled. Privy's out back. There's a bathing room off the kitchen. Just a hip bath, nothing fancy. We usually eat supper around 6. He left quickly, as if afraid of lingering. Eliza sank onto the bed, overwhelmed by the strangeness of it all. This morning she'd woken on a church bench with nothing. Now she sat in a dead woman's sewing room, surrounded by the remnants of a life cut short. "Miss Eliza!" Annie burst through the door without knocking. "Come see my room, and the chickens, and everything." The child grabbed her hand and pulled her into the main room, chattering non-stop. "This is where Papa reads to me at night, and that's Mama's picture. She was pretty, wasn't she? And here's where I practice my letters. Papa's teaching me, but his hands are too big for the slate pencil, so sometimes it's hard to see." Thomas was at the stove, adding wood to the firebox. "Annie, let Miss Eliza breathe." "But Papa, I have to show her everything so she'll know where things are, so she'll want to stay." That painful honesty again. Eliza let herself be pulled along as Annie showed her every corner of the house, the loft where she slept. You can see the stars through the cracks sometimes. The kitchen with its meager supplies. Papa makes beans a lot. The bathing room with its small hip bath and stacks of flour sack towels. And this is Papa's room, but we're not supposed to go in there 'cause it makes him sad, Annie said matter-of-factly, pointing at the other closed door. Annie, Thomas's voice held a warning. Well, it does. Annie insisted. You sleep in the chair most nights anyway. Thomas's face flushed dark red. Why don't you show Miss Eliza the garden? Outside, Annie continued her tour with the enthusiasm of a child who rarely had new audiences. The vegetable garden was indeed struggling. A few hardy pumpkin vines, some withered bean plants, herbs gone to seed. Mama knew how to make things grow. Annie explained. Papa tries, but he says he's got black thumbs instead of green ones. The potatoes did okay, though. They're in the root cellar. Want to see? By the time they'd visited the chickens, who were apparently all named after flowers, met the milk cow, Bessie, and explored the barn where a patient draft horse, Samuel, waited. The sun was beginning to sink toward the mountains. Eliza felt overwhelmed by the child's energy, but also strangely warmed by it. Annie, time to wash up for supper. Thomas called from the porch. Inside. Eliza watched him move around the kitchen with the awkward efficiency of someone who'd learned to cook from necessity rather than pleasure. He had beans soaking, salt pork frying, and was attempting to make cornbread. Can I help? Eliza offered. He looked relieved. I'm not much of a cook. Sarah, she could make anything taste good. I just try to make it filling. Eliza washed her hands and moved to the stove. May I? She gestured at the cornbread batter. Please. Annie won't eat it if it's too heavy, and mine always comes out like paving stones. She added a bit more liquid, an egg from the basket by the door, and a spoonful of the honey she spotted on a high shelf. Thomas watched with something like awe as she worked. You cook like Sarah did, he said quietly, by feel instead of recipes. My mother taught me. She said recipes were for people who didn't know how to listen to the food. A ghost of a smile crossed his face. Sarah used to say something similar. They worked in companionable silence while Annie set the table with careful concentration, placing the forks and knives just so. When they sat down to eat, the cornbread was light and golden, the beans seasoned properly, and even the salt pork was crispy rather than tough. This is good, Annie exclaimed. Papa, she can cook. She can really cook. I can see that, Thomas said. He ate slowly, as if savoring every bite. Been a while since we had a meal like this. How long? Annie asked. Since Mama? Thomas set down his fork. Annie, 2 years, 3 months, and 12 days. Annie recited. That's how long Mama's been gone. Mrs. Garrett helped me count once. The silence that followed was heavy. Eliza broke it by asking Annie about her studies, which launched the child into a long explanation of how hard arithmetic was and how letters never wanted to face the right direction. After supper, Thomas insisted on helping with dishes while Annie showed Eliza her few treasured possessions. A rag doll, obviously homemade, wearing a dress sewn from the same fabric as one in the photograph, a picture book with torn pages carefully mended, a cigar box containing treasures, pretty rocks, a blue jay feather, buttons, a brass thimble. This was Mama's, Annie said, holding up the thimble. She was teaching me to sew, but I wasn't very good yet. Papa can't sew at all. He tried to fix my dress once and sewed the sleeve closed. Everyone needs to learn, Eliza said diplomatically. Would you like me to help you practice while I'm here? Annie's face lit up. Yes, can we start tomorrow? Can we? If your papa doesn't mind. Thomas, drying the last plate, nodded. Be good for her to learn proper. Sarah wanted. He stopped, shook his head. She'd be pleased. As darkness fell, Thomas lit the oil lamps and added wood to the fireplace. The house took on a warmer quality in the soft light, shadows dancing on the walls. Annie yawned hugely, but protested when Thomas said it was bedtime. But Miss Eliza just got here, and she hasn't sung me the song yet. Miss Eliza is tired from traveling. There'll be time for songs tomorrow. You promise she'll still be here tomorrow?" Annie's voice went small and uncertain. Thomas and Eliza exchanged glances over the child's head. "I'll be here tomorrow," Eliza said gently. "Promise?" "I promise." Annie threw her arms around Eliza's waist in a fierce hug, then scampered up the ladder to the loft. Thomas followed to tuck her in, and Eliza could hear their voices, his deep rumble, her piping questions, the creak of the boards as he kissed her good night. When he came back down, Eliza was banking the fire for the night. He stood awkwardly, hands in his pockets. "Thank you," he said finally, "for today, for being kind to her. She hasn't had much softness since Sarah died. She's a wonderful child. She's lonely. We're too far from town for her to play with other children much, and I'm not." He gestured helplessly. "I can feed her and keep her warm and teach her to read, but there's things a girl needs that I don't know how to give." Eliza thought of her own father, trying so hard after her mother died, never quite knowing what to do with a grieving half-Cheyenne daughter. "You're doing better than you think." He looked at her then, really looked at her, and in the lamplight she could see Sarah's photograph reflected in his eyes. "Can I ask, why'd he not come? The man you were supposed to marry?" Eliza touched her face unconsciously. "I suppose when he saw what I was, he changed his mind. It's happened before." "What you are?" "Half-breed." The ugly word tasted bitter. "My mother was Cheyenne. My father was Irish. I'm neither one thing nor the other." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "Sarah was Lakota," he said finally. "Full blood. Her family had been forced onto the reservation, but she ran away. Worked at a boarding house in Cheyenne. That's where I met her. Most beautiful woman I'd ever seen. Smartest too. Spoke 3 languages. Could read and write better than me." Eliza's breath caught. "But the town—" "Some folks weren't happy about it. Still aren't. They tolerate Annie because she can pass for white if you don't look too close. But they remember her mother." His jaw tightened. "I've had to run a few men off the property who thought wrong things." "I'm sorry," Eliza whispered. "Don't be sorry. Be angry. Sarah was worth 10 of any of them, and Annie's worth 20. Anyone who can't see that isn't worth knowing." They stood in silence, the fire crackling softly. Finally, Thomas cleared his throat. "I should let you rest. Long day." "Mr. Hale?" Eliza called as he turned to go. "Thank you for taking a chance on a stranger, for sharing your home, for telling me about Sarah." He paused at his bedroom door. "Thomas," he said. "Just Thomas. And you're not a stranger. You're Annie's guest. That makes you family, at least for now." He disappeared into his room, leaving Eliza alone by the dying fire. She made her way to the little sewing room and changed into her nightgown, then sat on the narrow bed holding Sarah's unfinished quilt. Through the thin walls, she could hear Thomas moving around his room, the scrape of a chair. Annie was right. He probably did sleep in the chair most nights, unable to face the bed he'd shared with his wife. Eliza lay down, pulling the quilt over her. It did smell faintly of lavender, just as Annie had said. Through the small window, stars glittered in the clear Wyoming sky. The same stars that had watched her shiver on the church bench last night now looked down on her in this borrowed room, in this house of grief and tentative hope. She thought of Annie's fierce hug, of Thomas's awkward kindness, of Sarah's photograph on the mantel. She'd stumbled into a broken family, one missing its heart. She couldn't replace what they'd lost, wouldn't even try, but maybe, for a little while, she could help them remember what wholeness felt like. Tomorrow she'd make proper biscuits for breakfast. She'd help Annie with her letters. She'd see if any of those herbs in the garden could be saved. Small things, but in a life worn down to sharp edges, sometimes small things mattered most. For the first time in years, Eliza fell asleep without crying, the unfinished quilt warm around her shoulders and the sound of a child's peaceful breathing drifting down from the loft above. 3 weeks had passed since Eliza's arrival at the Hale homestead. The November wind howled fiercer now, bringing with it the promise of early snow. She'd settled into a routine up before dawn to start the fire and begin breakfast. Days filled with cooking, mending, teaching Annie her letters, and trying to coax life back into the neglected garden. Thomas kept a respectful distance, leaving early for his work with the cattle and returning late. But she'd caught him watching her sometimes with an expression she couldn't read. Annie, on the other hand, had attached herself to Eliza like a shadow, following her everywhere, drinking in every word, every gesture, every smile. It was a Tuesday evening when everything changed. The day had been unseasonably warm, what Thomas called false summer, and Annie had begged to play outside after supper. Eliza was washing dishes, watching through the window as the child ran through the yellowed grass, chasing the last fireflies of the season. Temperatures dropping fast, Thomas said, coming in from checking the animals. Might get that snow tonight after all. Eliza dried her hands, an uneasy feeling stirring in her chest. Her mother had always said she had the knowing, the ability to sense when something was wrong. Maybe we should call Annie in. Let her play a bit longer. She's been cooped up with the cold. A scream cut through the evening air. Not a playful shriek, but a cry of pure terror. Thomas was out the door before Eliza could blink, and she was right behind him. They found Annie by the creek, soaking wet and shivering violently, her lips already tinged blue. "The ice broke," she sobbed. "I just wanted to see if it was frozen, and it broke." Thomas scooped her up, running for the house. "Get her clothes off," he ordered Eliza, his voice tight with fear. "I'll stoke the fire." Eliza's hands were steady as she stripped the sodden clothes from Annie's shaking body. Though her heart hammered in her chest, the child's skin was ice cold, her teeth chattering so hard she couldn't speak. "Blankets," she called to Thomas. "All of them. And heat water, not too hot." She wrapped Annie in her own shawl first, rubbing the child's arms and legs vigorously to restore circulation. Thomas brought every blanket in the house, his face pale as flour. Will she build up that fire?" Eliza said firmly. "She needs warmth, but gradual. Too fast can be dangerous." She'd seen this before. Children falling through river ice back in Chicago. Some lived, some didn't. The next hours would tell. Eliza settled into the rocking chair by the fire with Annie in her lap, wrapped in layers of blankets. The child's shivers were violent, whole-body tremors that made the chair creak. "Cold," Annie whimpered. "So cold, Miss Liza." "I know, sweetheart. We're going to get you warm." Eliza began to hum, the same Cheyenne lullaby she'd sung on the wagon that first day. "Thomas, warm bricks in the oven. Wrap them in cloth. We'll put them at her feet." He moved to obey, grateful for something to do. Eliza could see the terror in his eyes, the memory of another sickbed, another crisis, another potential loss. Hours passed. Eliza never stopped moving, rocking, rubbing Annie's arms and legs, replacing cooled bricks with warm ones, spooning warm honey water between the child's chattering teeth. Thomas paced like a caged animal, adding wood to the fire until the room was stifling. "You'll make yourself sick," he said at one point. "Let me take her." "No." Eliza pulled Annie closer. "She needs to stay still. Movement will make her colder." Midnight came and went. Annie's shivers gradually subsided from violent tremors to occasional shudders. Her skin began to pink up, losing that terrifying blue tinge. But then came the fever. "No," Thomas whispered, his face crumbling. "No, not again. Not the fever." "This is different," Eliza said, though she wasn't entirely sure. "Her body's fighting the cold. It's natural, but we need to watch it." She sent Thomas for her bag, digging through it for the small leather pouch she always carried, her mother's medicine bundle, one of the few things she'd kept. "What's that?" Thomas asked warily. "Willow bark, feverfew, echinacea." She measured careful amounts into a cup. "My mother was a healer. She taught me Indian medicine." It wasn't a question. "Yes." She met his eyes steadily. "Do you object?" He looked at his daughter, flushed and restless in Eliza's arms. "Will it help?" "Yes." "Then I don't care if it's Chinese medicine or moon medicine or anything else. Please." Eliza steeped the herbs in hot water, adding honey to mask the bitter taste. Annie fussed but swallowed it, too weak to protest much. Then there was nothing to do but wait. Thomas finally stopped pacing and sank into the other chair. In the firelight, he looked haggard, older than his years. "Sarah got sick like this," he said quietly. "Started with chills, then fever. I sat right here, watching her burn up, and couldn't do anything. Doc from town said it was swamp fever. Said there was nothing to be done but pray." "This isn't swamp fever," Eliza said. "Annie's strong. She'll fight." "Sarah was strong too." His voice broke. "Strongest woman I ever knew. Didn't matter in the end." Eliza shifted Annie carefully and reached out, placing her free hand over Thomas's where it gripped the chair arm. His skin was rough, calloused, but warm. "She's not going to die. Thomas, I won't let her." He turned his hand palm up, gripping hers like a lifeline. "I can't lose her too. She's all I got left of Sarah. All I got left of anything good. You won't lose her." They sat like that through the long night, hands clasped while Eliza rocked Annie and hummed old songs. Sometimes Cheyenne healing chants, sometimes Irish ballads, sometimes hymns half-remembered from childhood. Thomas never let go of her hand, and she drew strength from his grip even as she tried to pour strength into him. As dawn crept across the sky, Annie's fever broke. She woke clear-eyed and hungry, wondering why everyone looked so tired. "Did I miss breakfast?" she asked, her voice hoarse but wonderfully normal. Thomas made a sound somewhere between a laugh and a sob. He gathered his daughter carefully into his arms, pressing his face into her hair. "You scared us, little bird. You scared us bad. I'm sorry. Papa, the ice looked so pretty. Like glass. No more creek until spring," he said firmly. "Promise me. Promise." Annie looked around from her father's arms. "Where's Miss Liza?" Eliza had stood to give them space, exhaustion hitting her like a physical blow now that the crisis had passed. She swayed slightly, and Thomas was there instantly. One arm still holding Annie, the other steadying Eliza. "You need rest," he said. "You've been up all night. I'm fine. You saved her." His voice was rough with emotion. "You saved my girl. Now let me take care of you both." He settled Annie back in the chair with strict instructions not to move, then guided Eliza to her room. She was too tired to protest as he pulled off her shoes, tucked the quilt around her. "Sleep," he ordered gently. "I'll watch her." "The herbs," Eliza mumbled. "Every 4 hours, and keep her warm but not too warm, and Eliza." Her name on his lips stopped her. He'd never used it before, always maintaining formal distance with Miss Turner. "I'll follow your instructions exactly. Rest now." She slept deeply, dreamlessly, and woke to afternoon sunlight and the sound of Annie's laughter. When she emerged from the room, she found father and daughter at the table, Annie wrapped in blankets but sitting up, sipping soup. "Miss Liza?" Annie reached out with both arms. "Papa made soup, but it's not as good as yours." "It's perfectly good soup," Thomas protested mildly. "You're just spoiled now?" Eliza checked Annie carefully. Temperature normal, breathing clear, color good. The danger had passed. Relief made her knees weak. "You need to eat too," Thomas said, already ladling soup into another bowl. "You look ready to fall over." They ate quietly, Annie chattering between spoonfuls about how she dreamed of flying with eagles. Normal. Wonderfully, blessedly normal. That evening, with Annie sleeping peacefully in her loft bed, Thomas found Eliza sitting by the dying fire. "I owe you a debt I can never repay," he said quietly. "You owe me nothing. Anyone would have—" "No." He sat in the other chair, leaning forward, elbows on his knees. "Not anyone. You knew what to do. You stayed calm. You used your mother's medicine even though—" He paused. "Even though folks around here might call it heathen nonsense. You saved her, Eliza, plain and simple. She saved herself by being strong. I just helped." He shook his head. "You did more than help. He struggled for words. "When Sarah died, I thought all the light went out of the world. Annie was the only thing that kept me going. And tonight I almost lost her too. But you were there, like something sent you to us." "Don't," Eliza whispered. "Don't make me into something I'm not. I'm just a woman who knows a little about healing. You're more than that." He looked at her directly then, and in his eyes she saw something that made her heart skip. "These past weeks, watching you with Annie, seeing how you've brought life back to this house, I'd forgotten what it felt like to not be alone in the burden." "Thomas, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I know you're only here temporary, until you figure out your next step. I needed you to know. What you did tonight, what you've done since you arrived, it matters. You matter." Eliza felt tears prick her eyes. When had someone last told her she mattered? "I should check on Annie," she said, standing abruptly. Thomas stood too. For a moment they were close enough that she could smell the wood smoke on his clothes, see the gold flecks in his gray eyes. Then he stepped back. "Good night, Eliza." "Good night, Thomas." She climbed to the loft, finding Annie sleeping peacefully. One small hand curled around her rag doll. Eliza adjusted the blankets, brushed a kiss across the child's forehead. "Mama," Annie murmured without waking. "Love you, Mama." Eliza's heart clenched. She stayed there a long moment, watching the rise and fall of Annie's chest, listening to her healthy breathing. Alive, safe, because of her mother's knowledge, passed down through generations, the medicine the civilized world scorned. When she finally returned to her room, she found something on her pillow, a small wrapped package. Inside was a silver thimble, delicate and worn. Sarah's thimble, the one from Annie's treasure box. There was a note in Thomas's careful handwriting. "Annie insisted you should have this. She says her mama would want you to have it, since you're teaching her to sew proper. I think she's right." Tea. Eliza sat on the bed, holding the thimble up to catch the moonlight. Such a small thing, but heavy with meaning. A mother's tool passed to another woman caring for her child. A symbol of trust, of acceptance, of something growing between three broken people trying to heal. She slipped the thimble onto her finger. It fit perfectly. Outside, snow began to fall, the first real snow of winter. But inside the little house, warmed by more than just the fire, Eliza felt spring stirring in her heart. She'd come here with nothing, expecting nothing, but somehow, in saving Annie, she'd found something worth saving in herself. Tomorrow there would be questions, from Annie, from Thomas, from herself. Tomorrow she'd have to decide whether to stay or go, whether to risk hoping again or guard her heart. But tonight, with Sarah's thimble on her finger and Annie's mama echoing in her ears, Eliza Turner allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, she'd finally found her place in the world. The snow had melted by the following week, leaving the ground muddy but the air crisp and clear. Annie had recovered completely from her fall through the ice, though Thomas watched her like a hawk whenever she ventured outside. It was during one of these watchful afternoons that Eliza found him sitting on the porch steps, staring at nothing. "She's just feeding the chickens," Eliza said gently, sitting beside him. "She won't go near the creek." "I know." He rubbed his face with both hands. Every time she's out of sight, I panic a little. That's natural. After what happened, it's been like this since Sarah died," he interrupted. "This fear that if I blink, I'll lose Annie too. Some nights I go up to the loft 3, 4 times just to make sure she's breathing." Eliza was quiet, understanding too well the weight of such fear. They sat in companionable silence, watching Annie scatter feed for the chickens, her laughter carrying on the wind. "Can I ask you something?" Thomas said suddenly. "About your mother, your family." Eliza tensed slightly. "What would you like to know?" "Everything, anything. You know about Sarah, about our life here. But I realize I know almost nothing about you, Except, he gestured vaguely, except what brought you here. She picked at a loose thread on her skirt. There's not much to tell. I doubt that. Eliza glanced at him, saw genuine interest in his eyes, not the prurient curiosity she was used to. My mother was called Morning Song in her language. She was barely 16 when she met my father at a trading post. He was 25, fresh from Ireland, working as a carpenter for the army. Love at first sight? So they claimed, though I think it was more like two lonely people finding solace in each other. She smiled sadly. My father, Patrick Turner, was running from something back in Ireland. He never said what. My mother had been cast out by her people for being too friendly with the whites. They were both outcasts who found home in each other. What happened to them? They tried to make a life. Moved to Chicago, where my father thought the mixing of peoples might make us less noticed. He was wrong. She pulled her shawl tighter. The Irish hated my mother for being Indian. The other immigrants hated my father for marrying beneath his race. And everyone hated me for being the proof of their union. Thomas's jaw tightened. Children aren't responsible for their parents' choices. Tell that to the children who threw stones, to the teachers who made me sit separately, to the shopkeepers who followed me around their stores. She tried to keep the bitterness from her voice. My father took to drink to cope with the shame. My mother retreated into herself, teaching me the old ways in secret, as if preserving her culture through me could make up for losing it herself. How old were you when they died? 12 when father drank himself into the grave. 15 when mother followed, coughing blood from the consumption she caught working in the laundries. Eliza watched Annie chase a particularly stubborn hen. I've been alone since then, working in factories, taking in washing, anything to survive, until you answered a marriage advertisement. The 4th one. Actually, she laughed humorlessly. You'd think I'd have learned after the first 3 rejections, but hope is a stubborn weed. It keeps growing back no matter how many times you try to kill it. Thomas shifted closer, not quite touching but near enough that she could feel his warmth. I'm glad your hope survived long enough to bring you here, even though I'm not what you expected when you offered shelter to a stranded woman. Especially because you're not what I expected. He turned to look at her fully. Eliza, that night with Annie, when you pulled out your mother's medicine, I saw Sarah in you. Not physically, but in your certainty, your strength. Sarah used to make medicines too. Different ones, Lakota remedies, but she had that same sure way about her. You must miss her terribly. I miss her every day, but lately, he paused, seeming to wrestle with his words. Lately, the missing doesn't hurt quite as sharp, and I've been feeling guilty about that, like I'm betraying her memory by not grieving as hard. Eliza understood that too. My mother used to say that grief is like winter, necessary, but not meant to last forever. Spring always comes, whether we're ready or not. Your mother sounds like she was wise. She was. I wish I'd inherited more of her wisdom and less of her sadness. They fell quiet again. Annie had given up on the hen and was now attempting to climb the big cottonwood tree. Thomas started to rise, alarm on his face, but Eliza placed a gentle hand on his arm. She needs to be a child, she said softly. You can't wrap her in cotton wool forever. I know, He settled back down. Tell me more. About your mother's teachings, the medicine you used on Annie. So Eliza talked. She told him about gathering herbs by moonlight, about the sacred nature of healing, about the balance between earth and sky, body and spirit. She shared stories her mother had whispered in the dark, how coyotes stole fire, how the Cheyenne came to be, how the stars were placed in the sky. Thomas listened with the same attention he'd give to a sermon, asking questions, never once suggesting such beliefs were primitive or wrong. When she spoke of the massacre at Sand Creek, where her mother's family had died, his face went hard with anger. I was there, he said quietly. Not at the massacre. I was just a boy then, but in the territory. I remember the soldiers coming back, bragging about what they'd done. Made me sick then. Makes me sicker now, knowing your family was there. You were a child, not responsible. Still, the things my people have done to yours. Your people, my people. Eliza shook her head. I'm half of each and wholly neither. I've never known which people to claim or which to blame. Maybe that's not a curse. Thomas suggested. Maybe that makes you a bridge. A bridge nobody wants to cross. I want to cross it. The words came out intense, almost fierce. Annie wants to cross it. Hell, she's been dancing back and forth across it since the day you arrived, as if summoned by her name. Annie came running up, leaves in her hair and dirt on her dress. Miss Liza, Papa, look what I found. She held out a perfectly round river stone, smooth and gray. It's just like the one in your special bag. Eliza's hand went automatically to the pouch at her throat. How do you know about that? Annie's face fell. I saw you holding it sometimes when you think nobody's looking. Did I do something bad? No, sweetheart. Eliza pulled the child onto her lap. You're just observant. This was my mother's protection stone. She gave it to me before she died. Can I see? Eliza hesitated, then pulled out the small leather pouch. The stone inside was indeed similar to Annie's fine smooth, round, fitting perfectly in the palm. It's pretty, Annie said reverently. Does it really protect you? I like to think so. It protected me enough to bring me here. Annie considered this seriously. Then it works real good. Can my stone be magic too? All stones have their own magic. Eliza said, you just have to listen to find out what it is. Annie held her stone to her ear, face scrunched in concentration. Mine says it wants to protect our family, all three of us. Thomas made that strangled sound he often did when Annie said something that cut too close to the heart, but Eliza just hugged the girl tighter. Then that's what it will do. That evening, after supper and Annie's bath, the child demanded stories. About your mama, she specified, and her mama, and all the mamas before. So Eliza told stories while she braided Annie's damp hair. Stories of strong women who survived against all odds, who kept their children fed and safe and taught them the old ways despite everything trying to strip those ways away. Thomas sat by the fire, supposedly mending harness, but Eliza could see he was listening too. Your mama sounds brave, Annie said sleepily. Like mine was. Papa, tell Miss Liza about when Mama faced down those men. Thomas's hand stilled on the leather. Annie, please, Papa, it's a good story about how Mama was brave. He set aside the harness. It was about a year after we married. I'd gone to town for supplies, left Sarah here alone. When I came back, there were 3 men here, drifters. They'd seen her through the window. Figured a Indian woman alone was... He paused, choosing his words carefully. Was available for their entertainment. Eliza's stomach clenched, knowing too well what men assumed about native women. But they didn't know my Sarah, Thomas continued, a proud smile ghosting across his face. She met them at the door with my hunting rifle, told them her husband would be back soon and they'd best move along. They laughed, said no white man would marry an Indian, said they'd wait to meet this imaginary husband. What did she do? Eliza asked, though she could guess. Shot the hat clean off the leader's head, told them the next one would be lower. Then she started singing her death song, loud as could be, scared them so bad they nearly trampled each other running away. Mama was fierce, Annie said proudly. Like a warrior. That she was. Little bird, that she was. Annie yawned hugely. I want to be fierce like Mama, and wise like Miss Liza's mama. Can I be both? You already are, Eliza said, kissing the top of her head. Now, time for bed. After Annie was settled in the loft, Eliza and Thomas returned to their chairs by the fire. The easy companionship of the afternoon had shifted into something else, something charged with possibility. I've been thinking, Thomas said finally, about what you said, being a bridge. Oh. Sarah used to say something similar, that Annie would be a bridge between worlds, that maybe that was why God brought us together, to create someone who could belong to both and help heal the divide. She sounds like she was wise too. She was, though I didn't always understand it at the time. He leaned back, staring at the ceiling. She tried to teach me some of her language, her stories. I was always too busy, too tired, too something. Now I wish I'd listened better. For Annie's sake. It's not too late. You could learn. I could teach you what I know. It's not the same as Lakota ways, but there are similarities. He looked at her with such naked hope it took her breath. You would do that? Of course. Annie deserves to know all of her heritage, not just the parts that make others comfortable. And how long would these lessons take? His voice was careful, but she heard the real question underneath. As long as needed, she said softly. I'm in no hurry to leave. Good. The word came out rough. That's good. They sat quietly, the fire crackling between them. Finally. Thomas stood, banking the coals for the night. Eliza? Yes. Thank you for sharing your story, for not thinking I was weak for grieving so long, for, he gestured helplessly, for being you. Before she could respond, he was gone, his bedroom door closing softly. Eliza sat alone, heart racing. Something had shifted tonight, some invisible line crossed. They'd moved beyond host and guest, beyond convenience and kindness, into something nameless but real. She thought of Annie's stone, promised to protect their family, all three of us. The child had said with such certainty, as if it were already true, as if they were already bound by more than circumstance. In her room, Eliza placed Annie's gift stone next to her mother's on the small table by her bed. 2 stones, 2 worlds, 2 broken hearts trying to mend into something whole. Through the thin walls, she could hear Thomas moving restlessly. No chair tonight, he was in his bed. Progress, perhaps. Or maybe just exhaustion from carrying his grief alone for so long. Eliza touched Sarah's thimble, which she now wore on a string around her neck alongside her mother's pouch. 2 mothers, 2 legacies, 2 paths converging in this small house on the Wyoming prairie. She'd thought she was beyond hope when she stepped off that train. But hope, as she'd told Thomas, was a stubborn weed. And here, in this unlikely soil, it was beginning to bloom again. Tomorrow she'd start teaching Annie more of the old stories. She'd show Thomas how to make the healing tea that had saved his daughter. She'd continue the slow work of turning a house of grief into a home of possibility. But tonight, she simply held the 2 stones and whispered a prayer to both her mothers, the one who'd birthed her and the one whose place she was slowly, carefully, beginning to fill. She prayed for wisdom, for strength, for the courage to stay when every loss she'd faced told her to run. Most of all, she prayed that this fragile bridge they were building could bear the weight of 3 hearts learning to beat as one. December arrived with a vengeance, bringing blizzards that trapped them inside for days at a time. The forced closeness had woven the 3 of them tighter together. Annie practicing her letters at the table while Eliza cooked. Thomas reading aloud by the fire in the evenings. All of them moving around each other with the easy familiarity of family. It was during one of these snowbound afternoons that trouble came. Annie had begged to go out and play in the fresh snow, and Eliza had bundled her up carefully. 2 pairs of stockings, her warmest dress, coat, mittens, and a scarf wrapped twice around her small face. Stay where I can see you from the window, Eliza cautioned. And don't go past the barn. I promise. Annie bounced out the door, eager to build a snow family she'd been planning all morning. Eliza returned to her mending, glancing up frequently to check on the child. Thomas was in the barn, tending to the animals. The peace of a winter afternoon settled over the house. Then she heard it, Annie's scream, high and terrified, different from her playful shrieks. Eliza dropped the shirt she was mending and ran outside without stopping for her coat. Annie was by the chicken coop, pressed against the wall, and between her and the house stood a wolf. Not a coyote, a full-grown wolf, lean with winter hunger, its yellow eyes fixed on the child. Eliza's blood turned to ice. The rifle was inside, too far. Thomas was in the barn, might not hear. The wolf took a step toward Annie, who whimpered and tried to press herself flatter against the wall. No, Eliza said firmly. Stepping off the porch, the wolf's attention shifted to her. No, she's mine. You can't have her. Her mother's voice echoed in her memory. The wolf is a teacher, but also a hunter. Respect both aspects. Show no fear, for fear is prey. Eliza walked forward slowly, steadily, placing herself between the wolf and Annie. She began to hum, not a lullaby this time, but an older song, one her mother had called the Song of Boundaries. It was meant to remind predators that humans were not prey, that they had their own power. The wolf paused, confused perhaps by her lack of fear, by the strange melody. Eliza continued forward, never breaking eye contact, her humming growing stronger. She could hear Annie crying behind her, but didn't turn. You are hungry, she said in Cheyenne, the words coming unbidden. But this is not your hunting ground. This child is under protection. Go, find your meal elsewhere. The wolf's ears flicked. It took a step back, then another. Eliza kept humming, kept walking forward, until she could reach behind her and touch Annie's trembling form. When I say run, you run to the house, she whispered. Don't look back. But Miss Liza, run, now. Annie ran. The wolf's attention followed the movement, and for a terrible moment, Eliza thought it would give chase. She stepped forward more aggressively, raising her arms to make herself larger, her humming becoming almost a growl. The wolf looked back at her, and in its eyes she saw not just hunger but a kind of recognition. Wolf to wolf, predator to predator, mother to mother. Then it turned and loped away, disappearing into the swirling snow. Eliza's knees gave out. She sank into the snow, shaking now that the danger had passed. Strong arms caught her before she could fall completely. I've got you, Thomas said, pulling her against his chest. God almighty, Eliza, I saw from the barn door. You walked right up to it. Annie, she's safe, inside. But you... His arms tightened around her. Don't ever do that again. Don't ever risk yourself like that. I had to... She was... Eliza's teeth were chattering now, shock and cold hitting simultaneously. I couldn't let it have her. Thomas half-carried her inside, where Annie flew at them both, sobbing. Miss Liza saved me. The wolf wanted to eat me and she made it go away. She talked to it in Indian and it listened. Shh, little bird. Everyone's safe now. But Thomas's hands were shaking as he wrapped a blanket around Eliza's shoulders. How? He asked quietly, once Annie had been calmed with hot cocoa and settled by the fire. How did you do that? I don't know, Eliza admitted. My mother taught me about wolves, but I just knew I couldn't let it hurt her. I'd die first. Thomas's face went through several expressions before settling on something fierce and tender. You could have died, facing down a wolf with nothing but a song. It wasn't nothing. It was... She struggled to explain. It was claiming my territory, showing I was willing to fight. Predators understand that language. You called Annie yours, he said softly. I heard you. She's mine. You said... Eliza flushed. I didn't mean to presume. No. He caught her hands. No, don't apologize. She is yours. Has been since the day she asked you to be her mama. Maybe before that, and seeing you today, willing to face death for her. His voice broke. Sarah would have done the same thing. Did do similar, more than once. You have the same fierce heart. Thomas? But Annie interrupted, climbing into Eliza's lap despite being told to stay by the fire. The wolf was so big, she whispered. Bigger than the dogs in town. Why didn't it eat you? Because I spoke its language, Eliza said simply. And because I have strong medicine protecting me. She touched the pouch at her throat. My mother's stone. And yours. Annie's eyes went wide. My stone helped. I believe it did. You said it would protect our family, remember? And it did. Annie hugged her fiercely. It protected you so you could protect me. Over the child's head. Eliza met Thomas's eyes. The look there made her heart race faster than facing the wolf had. That evening, after Annie had finally settled in the loft, though only after extracting promises that Eliza would check the windows for wolves. Thomas and Eliza sat closer than usual by the fire. "I need to teach you to shoot," he said abruptly. "The rifle? You should know how to use it." "I know how," Eliza said quietly. "My father taught me, but I chose not to today." "Why?" She considered her words carefully. "Violence creates violence. The wolf was hungry, not evil. If I'd had the rifle, I might have killed it out of fear, but by meeting it as an equal, I gave it the choice to leave with dignity." "You gave a wolf dignity?" "All creatures deserve dignity, even predators, especially predators. Perhaps because they're so often killed simply for being what they are." Thomas was quiet for a long moment. "Like Indians are killed for being Indians. Like half-breeds are scorned for being mixed." "Yes," he stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "When I saw you out there, that wolf between you and Annie, I thought my heart would stop. I was running from the barn, knowing I'd never make it in time. And then you just walked out there like you were going to a church social." "I was terrified," Eliza admitted. "But fear wouldn't have saved her." "No, but love did." He turned back to her. "That's what I saw today. Not just courage, but love so fierce it could face down death itself. Any mother would—" "You're not any mother. You're Annie's mother, in all the ways that matter." He returned to his chair, leaning forward intently. "I've been a coward, Eliza, letting you stay here in this half-life, not guest, not family, caught between, afraid to ask for more because I might lose again. But today showed me that not asking is its own kind of loss." Eliza's breath caught. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that Annie needs a mother. Not a temporary one, not a maybe one, but a real one. And He swallowed hard. "I need a partner. Someone who understands that love isn't about blood or time or even promises. It's about choosing to stand between danger and what matters most. Thomas, I'm not asking for your answer tonight. I know I'm not what you came here looking for. A widower with a child. A small farm. A heart still healing. But I can offer you a home. Not just a house, a family. Not just arrangements. And if, in time, affection grows between us beyond partnership." He reached out, fingers barely brushing hers. "I'd welcome that too." Eliza turned her hand palm up, letting their fingers interlace. "I didn't come here looking for anything except escape, but what I found—" She squeezed his hand. "Annie asked me to be her mama that first day. Every day since, she's claimed me a little more. And you've shown me more true kindness than I've known since my parents died. Is that enough? Kindness and need? My mother used to say that love grows best in practical soil, that the deepest roots come from daily care, not grand passion." She lifted their joined hands, studying how well they fit together. "I've had nothing for so long. Thomas, the idea of having everything, a home, a child, a purpose, it frightens me more than that wolf did." "Then we'll go slow," he promised. "Court proper, even if you're already living here. Let Annie get used to the idea gradual-like. Let ourselves get used to it too. The town will talk. A mail-order bride who couldn't keep her intended, taking up with a widower. Let them talk. They talked when I married Sarah. They'll talk no matter what we do." His jaw set stubbornly. "I'm done living my life by other folks' opinions." A log shifted in the fire, sending up sparks. Outside, wind howled around the corners of the house, but inside was warm, safe, complete. "I should check on Annie," Eliza said softly. "She was truly frightened today." "She was, but she was also proud. Did you hear her telling that story already? How her Miss Liza faced down a wolf with nothing but a song?" He smiled slightly. "By next week, you'll have sung it to sleep and invited it for supper in her version." Eliza laughed, surprising herself. She does embellish. Gets that from her mother. Sarah could spin a tale that would have you believing the sky was green and grass was blue. "Tell me more about her," Eliza said. "Not the sad parts, the everyday parts." "What made her laugh?" What did she cook when she was happy? How did she wear her hair? Thomas's face softened. For the first time, speaking of Sarah seemed to bring more warmth than pain. She laughed at my terrible jokes. The worse they were, the harder she laughed. When she was happy, she made fry bread with honey, ate it myself sick the first time she made it for me. And her hair, he smiled in memory. She wore it in 2 braids usually, but at night she'd let it loose, and it would fall like a black river down her back. She sounds wonderful. She was, and you know what? I think she'd like you, especially after today. He stood, reluctantly releasing her hand. She was fierce about protecting Annie too, called her Little Bird in Lakota, same as I do in English. Said Annie would fly between 2 worlds and make them one. Maybe she will. Maybe she already is, with your help. He paused at his bedroom door. Eliza, what I said earlier about courting and partnership and everything. Take your time thinking on it. But know that whatever you decide, you have a home here as long as you want it. I know, she whispered. That's what makes it precious. After he'd gone, Eliza climbed quietly to the loft. Annie was sleeping, but restlessly, small whimpers escaping. Eliza sat on the edge of the narrow bed, stroking the child's hair, humming softly, the same boundary song that had sent the wolf away. Annie's eyes fluttered open. Miss Liza? Is the wolf gone? Yes, sweetheart, far away. Will you stay with me, just till I fall back asleep? Of course. Annie scooted over, making room. As Eliza lay down beside her, the child curled into her side with the trust of someone who'd never doubted she'd be saved. I love you, Miss Liza, Annie murmured. You're the best mama person ever. Eliza's eyes burned with unshed tears. I love you too, little bird. Papa loves you too, Annie added sleepily. He just doesn't know how to say it yet, but he will. Mama told me in a dream that he would. Eliza's breath caught. She did? She said she sent you to us, said we needed each other. Annie yawned. Mama was always right about stuff. As the child drifted back to sleep, Eliza lay in the narrow bed, listening to the wind outside and the soft breathing of the child she'd claimed as surely as if she'd borne her. Downstairs, she could hear Thomas moving about, banking the fire, checking the locks, the nighttime rituals of a man protecting his family. His family, their family. The wolf had been a test, perhaps, not just of courage, but of belonging. She'd claimed Annie as hers, and in doing so, had claimed her place in this small, wounded, healing family. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the town's gossip, the complexities of courtship while living under the same roof, the delicate work of honoring Sarah's memory while building something new. But tonight, with Annie safe in her arms and Thomas's promise echoing in her heart, Eliza Turner finally understood what her mother had meant about love growing in practical soil. It wasn't the grand passion of fairy tales. It was choosing to stand between a wolf and a child. It was mending shirts and making biscuits and teaching letters. It was 2 stones on a bedside table and a thimble worn next to the heart. It was coming home, not to a place, but to people who needed her as much as she needed them. The wolf had seen it. Predator recognizing predator. She would fight for this family with all the fierceness of her mixed heritage, all the wisdom of 2 cultures, all the love of a heart that had finally found where it belonged. Outside, snow continued to fall, covering the tracks of wolf and woman alike, leaving the world clean and new and full of possibility. Christmas Eve arrived with a fresh snowfall that transformed the homestead into something from a fairy tale. Annie had been bouncing with excitement all week, helping Eliza string dried berries and popcorn for Garland, cutting paper angels with her newly improved scissor skills, and whispering secrets about the presents she was making. The courtship Thomas had promised had been gentle and steady small gestures that meant everything. He'd started joining them for afternoon tea, something he'd never done before. He'd bring her interesting stones or feathers he found while working, knowing she was teaching Annie to see the sacred in natural things. Once, he'd returned from town with a small bottle of rosé water, mumbling something about seeing it in the general store window. But tonight felt different, charged with possibility. "Papa's acting strange," Annie announced, helping Eliza roll out dough for sweet biscuits. "He keeps going to the barn and coming back without doing anything." "Maybe he's checking on the animals," Eliza suggested, though she'd noticed Thomas's restlessness too. "It's cold tonight. The animals are fine. I think he's nervous about something." Annie leaned closer, flour dusting her nose. "Maybe he's going to ask you to marry him tonight." "Annie Marie Hale," Eliza said, fighting a blush. "Where do you get such ideas?" "From Mrs. Watson at the general store. She said it's about time Papa made an honest woman of you, whatever that means. Are you dishonest, Miss Liza?" Before Eliza could formulate a response to that, Thomas came in again, snow on his shoulders and something hidden behind his back. "Papa!" Annie exclaimed. "What have you got?" "Nothing for nosy little girls," he said, but his eyes were soft. "Eliza, could I speak with you, privately?" Annie's eyes went wide. "It is a proposal." "Annie, go wash your hands and change into your nightgown," Eliza said firmly. "I'll come tuck you in soon." "But go on, little bird," Thomas added. "This is grown-up talk." Annie scampered up to the loft, but Eliza could hear her footsteps pause at the top, clearly listening. "Annie Marie, if I hear one more creak from those boards, no sweet biscuits tomorrow." Thomas called up. The footsteps hurried away. Thomas still stood by the door, snow melting on his shoulders, whatever he was hiding still behind his back. "I've been trying to find the right words all week," he began. "Sarah always said I was better with my hands than with speeches. Thomas, let me say this, please." He took a deep breath. "When you came here, I was just trying to survive each day. Get up, work, keep Annie fed and safe, fall asleep in that chair because the bed felt too empty. I wasn't living, just existing." He moved closer, and Eliza could see the vulnerability in his eyes. "Then you walked into our lives with your quiet strength and your gentle ways. You made Annie laugh again. You made this house feel like a home. You faced down a wolf for our girl, and in that moment, I knew." "Knew what?" Eliza whispered. "That I loved you. Not just grateful, not just fond, loved, the kind of love that makes a man want to be better than he is." He brought his hand from behind his back, revealing a small wooden box. "This was my mother's, and Sarah wore it after her. I'd like you to have it." With trembling fingers, Eliza opened the box. Inside lay a simple gold ring with a small blue stone. Nothing fancy, but beautiful in its plainness. "It's not much," Thomas continued hurriedly. "Not what you deserve, but it's got history. My father gave it to my mother when they homesteaded in Kansas. She gave it to me for Sarah, and now, if you'll have us, I'd like to give it to you." Eliza stared at the ring, overwhelmed. "Thomas, I know it's only been 2 months. I know you came here looking for someone else. But Eliza Turner, I'm asking you to marry me, to be Annie's mother legal and true, to be my wife and partner, to let us be your family, official and forever." "Are you sure?" Eliza's voice was barely audible. "The town already talks. I'm a failed mail-order bride, half Cheyenne, with nothing to bring but—" "You bring yourself," Thomas interrupted fiercely. "That's all we need, all I need. Say yes," Annie's voice piped from the loft. "Please, Miss Liza, say yes." Despite the emotion of the moment, both adults found themselves laughing. "Annie Marie," Thomas called up. "This is private." "Nothing's private in a house this small," Annie retorted, appearing at the top of the ladder in her nightgown. "Besides, this is about me too. I need a mama, and Miss Liza needs us. And you need to stop sleeping in that chair. Papa, it makes you grumpy." "Annie, she's right," Eliza said softly. She looked at Thomas, then up at Annie, then at the ring in her hands. "We all need each other. Is that a yes?" Hope blazed in Thomas's eyes. "That's a yes." Annie shrieked with joy and practically flew down the ladder, throwing herself at both adults. Thomas caught her with one arm while pulling Eliza close with the other, and for a moment they stood there, the three of them, holding tight to each other while snow fell softly outside. "Can I see the ring? Can I?" Annie bounced with excitement. Thomas took the ring from the box with reverent fingers and slipped it onto Eliza's left hand. It fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting for her. "Now it's official?" Annie asked. "Miss Liza is my mama now." "Well, we need to have a wedding first," Thomas explained. "With the preacher and everything." "When? Tomorrow?" "Not quite that soon. Little bird, maybe after the New Year, the day after tomorrow's Sunday." Annie interrupted. "Preacher Williams will be at church." "We could do it then." "Annie, that's too fast. Miss Eliza needs time to prepare, and, actually," Eliza said quietly, "I don't need time. I don't need a fancy dress or a big celebration. I just need—" She looked at Thomas, then at Annie. "I just need my family." Thomas's face transformed with joy. "Sunday, then, truly. If you're sure." He kissed her then, swift and sweet, while Annie clapped and danced around them. When they broke apart, both were blushing, but smiling too. "I have something else," Thomas said, seeming to remember. "Wait here." He went to his room and returned with a bundle wrapped in brown paper. This was Sarah's wedding dress. I saved it, thinking maybe Annie might want it someday. But if you'd like, Sarah would want you to have it. To wear it." Eliza's hands shook as she unwrapped the dress. It was beautiful. Cream-colored wool with blue ribbon trim, obviously made with love and care. Traditional Lakota beadwork decorated the cuffs and collar. "It's beautiful," she breathed. "But are you sure? It was hers, and now it's yours," Thomas said firmly. "Everything that was hers is yours now. This house, this family, this life we're building. She'd want it that way. Mama told me in my dream," Annie added solemnly. "She said to give you her dress, said you'd make it happy again." Eliza clutched the dress to her chest, tears streaming down her face. "I'll honor it, honor her, I promise." "We know," Thomas said simply. "That's why we love you." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of joy and planning. Annie insisted on trying on her best dress to make sure it still fit. Thomas brought out a small bottle of brandy he'd been saving, and even let Annie have a tiny sip mixed with lots of honey and water for a toast. They sang Christmas carols, and Eliza taught them a Cheyenne winter song her mother had loved. Finally, with Annie drooping despite her excitement, they tucked her into bed. She insisted both Thomas and Eliza sit with her. "Tell me the story," she demanded sleepily, "about how you met and fell in love." Thomas and Eliza exchanged glances. "Well," Eliza began, "once upon a time, there was a little girl who was looking for a mama, and a lady who was looking for a home," Thomas added, "and a papa who was looking for hope." Eliza continued, "And they found each other," Annie murmured, already half asleep, "and lived happily ever after." "Yes," Thomas and Eliza said together. They did. When Annie was fully asleep, they crept back downstairs. The house was warm and quiet, lit only by the dying fire and one oil lamp. "I should tell you," Thomas said quietly. "I'm not an easy man to live with. I work too hard, worry too much. I'll probably always be overprotective of Annie. And sometimes, when the grief hits, I might need to be alone." "I understand grief," Eliza replied. "And I'm not easy either. I have nightmares sometimes. I forget to eat when I'm focused on something. I talk to plants and stones like they can hear me. They probably can. When you're talking." He pulled her close. "We're a pair of broken people, aren't we?" "Broken can be mended," Eliza said, thinking of Sarah's quilt she'd been slowly finishing. "Sometimes the mending makes things stronger than they were before." They stood together in the lamplight, holding each other, letting the reality of their decisions sink in. In 2 days, she'd be Eliza Hale. Annie would legally be her daughter. This house would officially be her home. "No regrets?" Thomas asked. "This isn't the life you set out to find." "No," Eliza agreed. "It's better. It's real." He kissed her again, deeper this time, full of promise and passion carefully banked. When they parted, both were breathing hard. "Sunday can't come soon enough," he murmured. "2 more nights," Eliza whispered back. "Then no more chair for you." He laughed, low and warm. "Mrs. Watson was right. It is about time I made an honest woman of you. I've always been honest. It's the rest of the world that wanted me to lie about who I am. No more lying, no more hiding. You're going to be my wife, Annie's mother, and anyone who has a problem with that can answer to me." The fierce protectiveness in his voice warmed her more than the fire. This man, this child, this life. They were worth every lonely night, every rejection, every moment of despair that had led her here. Christmas morning dawned bright and clear. Annie woke them early, dancing with excitement about presents and wedding plans equally. They exchanged simple gifts. Annie had made them each a drawing. Thomas had carved a wooden doll for Annie and a hair comb for Eliza, and Eliza had sewn new shirts for both of them. But the real gift was the joy that filled the house, the certainty that they were no longer 3 separate people but a family, soon to be sealed by law and God. Neighbors would talk. There would be those who disapproved of a white man marrying another native woman, of a half-breed raising a quarter-breed child. There would be challenges and hard times and grief that still needed healing. But as Eliza stood at the window, watching Thomas and Annie build a snowman in the yard, Sarah's ring warm on her finger, and Sarah's dress hanging ready for tomorrow, she knew they could face anything together. The wolf had tested her courage. The ring had sealed her belonging. Tomorrow would make it official, but in her heart, she was already home. "Mama," Annie called from outside. "Come help us. The snowman needs a mama too. Mama." The word that had once meant loss now meant future. Eliza grabbed her shawl and went to join her family in the snow, ready to build something new and beautiful together. Tomorrow, she would walk into the church as Eliza Turner, abandoned and alone. She would walk out as Eliza Hale, wife and mother and keeper of a love she'd never dared dream of finding. The fairy tale ending. Annie wanted? Perhaps not. This was better, messy and real, and built on daily choices rather than magic. But it was theirs, and that made it perfect. As Thomas caught her hand and Annie danced around them in the snow, Eliza felt her mother's spirit and Sarah's blessing wrapped around them like a warm blanket. 2 women who had loved and lost, watching over 3 people who had found each other just in time. Tomorrow would come with its vows and witnesses. But today, in the snow and sunlight, they were already everything they needed to be. A family, complete and whole and ready for whatever came next. The following autumn, as golden leaves danced in the Wyoming wind, Eliza stood in the garden she'd coaxed back to life, one hand resting on her swollen belly. The baby would come with the first snow, Martha Coleman predicted. Maybe sooner given how low Eliza was carrying. "Mama, look!" Annie ran toward her, braids flying, clutching a handful of late-blooming wildflowers. At 5 years old, she'd grown like a weed, all knobby knees and endless questions. "These are for the baby. Do you think she'll like them?" "She?" Eliza smiled, accepting the slightly crushed bouquet. "You're so certain it's a sister?" "I asked for a sister," Annie said matter-of-factly. "When I talked to Mama Sarah at night, she said she'd see what she could do." The easy way Annie spoke of her first mother no longer startled Eliza. They'd found a balance. The 3 of them, soon to be 4, in honoring the past while building the future. Sarah's photograph still held pride of place on the mantel, but now it was joined by their wedding portrait, taken by a traveling photographer who'd passed through in the spring. "There are my girls," Thomas called, returning from the field. The harvest was almost done, their best yet. The corn stood tall, the wheat golden, the vegetable garden overflowing with plenty to see them through winter. He kissed Annie's head, then Eliza's cheek, his hand joining hers on her belly. "How's our little one today?" "Active," Eliza said. "I think this one's going to be a fighter." "Like the mama," Thomas said with a grin. He'd never quite gotten over Eliza facing down the wolf, though that story had evolved in town to include 3 wolves. possibly a bear, and definitely some kind of Indian magic. "Papa, can I go show Mrs. Henderson my flowers?" Annie asked. Their nearest neighbor had softened considerably toward them after Eliza had nursed her through a difficult bout of pneumonia last spring. "If your mama says yes." Eliza nodded. "But straight there and back, and take the bread I baked for her." Annie scampered off, and Thomas pulled Eliza close, or as close as her belly would allow. "You've won them over. You know, the whole town." "I've won over some of them," Eliza corrected. "The ones worth winning." It was true. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, but slowly, steadily. The town had come to accept the new Mrs. Hale. It helped that she'd delivered 3 babies safely when the doctor was too far away, that she'd taught several of the town children their letters alongside Annie, that her herbal remedies actually worked. There were still those who whispered, who crossed the street rather than speak to her, but they were fewer now, and their opinions mattered less with each passing day. "I need to tell you something," Thomas said, his expression growing serious. "Jake Morrison came by while you were in the garden. Seems there's a woman at the station, another mail-order bride, but her intended took one look and left her standing there." Eliza's heart clenched, remembering too well that particular humiliation. "Is she still there?" "Jake said she was sitting on the same bench where I found you. Young thing," he said, scared. "We have to help her. I thought you might say that." Thomas smiled. "Already told Jake we'd take the wagon to town. Figured we could offer her a meal, maybe a place to stay until she figures things out. Just like you did for me. Best decision I ever made." He kissed her softly. "Though I should warn you, Annie's already planning to keep her. Something about the baby needing an aunt." Eliza laughed. "Of course she is." An hour later, they rode into town. Annie wedged between them, chattering about everything the potential houseguest would need to know. But when they reached the station, Eliza's breath caught. The woman on the bench couldn't have been more than 18, with auburn hair and skin that marked her as mixed heritage, though different from Eliza's own. Her bag was pitifully small, her dress threadbare, and her face streaked with tears. "You wait here," Eliza told Thomas, climbing down carefully. "This needs a woman's touch first." She approached slowly, remembering her own fear and shame. The girl looked up with eyes the color of sage, beautiful and devastated. "I'm Eliza Hale," she said gently, sitting beside her. "I hear you've had a difficult day." The girl's face crumpled. He said he didn't know I was colored, but I told him in my letters. I said my grandmother was Mexican, my grandfather Negro. I never lied." "I know," Eliza said. "They see what they want to see in letters, then blame us when reality doesn't match their fantasy." The girl stared at her. "You're half Cheyenne, half Irish, and 2 years ago, I sat on this very bench, left by a man who'd promised me a home." Eliza gestured toward the wagon. "That man there offered me shelter for a night. I never left. You married him? Last Christmas. And now—" She patted her belly. "Now we're expecting our first child together. His daughter from his first marriage is convinced it's a girl and has already named her Rose." The girl managed a watery smile. "I'm Maria Gonzalez." "Well, Maria, how would you like to come home with us? Have a hot meal, a warm bed, and time to decide what comes next. No obligations, no expectations, just one woman who's been where you are helping another." "Why would you do that for a stranger?" "Because someone did it for me. And because my daughter Annie will never forgive me if I don't bring home someone who needs us." Eliza stood, offering her hand. "Come, let's get you fed and warm." Maria took her hand, and together they walked to the wagon. Thomas tipped his hat politely, and Annie immediately began peppering their guest with questions. As they rode home, Eliza caught Thomas's eye over the girls' heads. He smiled, that quiet smile that said he understood. They'd been blessed with unexpected love, and now they could pass that blessing forward. Back at the homestead, Maria fit into their routine with surprising ease. She was good with her hands, better with a needle than even Eliza, and had a gift for making Annie laugh. Within a week, it felt as if she'd always been there. "I could teach at the school," Maria said one evening, helping Eliza with the mending while Thomas read to Annie. "I have my certificate. I know there's no teacher since Mrs. Paulson left." "They might not accept," Eliza began gently. "A mixed blood teacher? Perhaps not, but I have to try. I can't hide forever." "No," Eliza agreed. "Hiding doesn't work. I tried that for years. Being yourself, proudly and openly, that's the only way." It took time and Thomas's influence, but eventually, the school board agreed to let Maria teach on a trial basis. The children loved her, and that swayed more minds than any argument could have. As the first snow began to fall, Eliza's pains started. Maria ran for Martha Coleman while Thomas paced and Annie stationed herself as guardian at the bedroom door. "No men allowed," she informed her father seriously. "Mama needs woman magic now." It was a long labor, longer than Martha had predicted. Eliza gripped the bedpost, breathing through the pain, drawing on her mother's strength and Sarah's blessing and her own fierce will. "That's it," Martha encouraged. "You're doing fine. Baby's just taking the scenic route." Maria bathed her face with cool cloths and sang softly in Spanish, a lullaby her own grandmother had sung. Annie, despite orders to stay out, crept in and held Eliza's hand. "You can do it, Mama," she whispered. "You're the strongest person I know. You faced down a wolf." Finally, as dawn broke over the snow-covered prairie, a baby's cry filled the air. Not the fragile mewl of a weak infant, but a strong, indignant wail. "A son," Martha announced, placing the baby in Eliza's arms. "A fine, healthy son." Thomas was allowed in then, and the look on his face when he saw his son made every moment of pain worth it. He sank to his knees beside the bed, one arm around Annie, the other touching the baby's dark hair with reverent fingers. "He's perfect," he whispered. "What should we call him?" "James," Eliza said without hesitation. "James Patrick Hale, for both our fathers, and for the man who didn't come." Annie added wisely, "Because if he had, we wouldn't have Mama or baby James." Even Maria laughed at that. The simple truth of it. One man's rejection had led to this. A family that defied convention. A love that transcended loss. A home that welcomed all who needed it. As the snow continued to fall, they gathered in the bedroom. Thomas, Eliza, Annie, baby James, Maria, and Martha. 6 people who might never have connected if not for abandoned hopes turning into unexpected blessings. "Look," Annie said, pointing out the window. "The wolf!" Indeed, at the edge of the property, just visible through the snow, stood a gray wolf. It watched the house for a long moment, then turned and melted back into the wilderness. "Checking on us," Eliza murmured, "making sure we're well." "Wolves do that?" Maria asked. "This one does." Thomas said, "It knows family when it sees it." Later, when the house was quiet and Martha had gone home with promises to return tomorrow, Eliza lay in bed with James at her breast and Annie curled against her side. Thomas sat in the chair beside them, though these days he slept in the bed where he belonged. "We did good, didn't we?" Eliza said softly. "Building this family. We did better than good." Thomas replied, "We did miraculous." Through the wall, they could hear Maria moving about in what had been Eliza's room, now hers. Come spring, Thomas planned to add more rooms. The house would grow as their family had grown, not just in number, but in heart. "Mama?" Annie's sleepy voice broke the quiet. "Is our family complete now?" Eliza thought of the women who might still find their way to that bench at the station, of the children Annie and James might bring into the world, of the love that seemed to multiply rather than divide when shared. "No, little bird," she said. "Our family's not complete. It's just beginning." Outside, snow blanketed the Wyoming prairie, covering the old trails and making everything new. Inside, a fire crackled in the hearth, a baby nursed at his mother's breast, and a family that shouldn't exist by any conventional measure thrived in defiance of all expectations. The mail-order bride no one wanted had become the mother everyone needed. The widower trapped in grief had found joy again. The motherless child had gained not just a mother, but an aunt and a brother. And the house that had echoed with loss now rang with laughter. It wasn't the life any of them had planned. It was far better, messy and complicated and real. A testament to the truth that families aren't just made by blood or law, but by choice, by courage, and by the willingness to see strangers as blessings in disguise. As the wolf tracks filled with fresh snow and the world outside turned white and clean, Eliza Hale closed her eyes and gave thanks for unanswered prayers and broken promises. They had led her here, to this moment, to this family, to this love that was worth every moment of pain that came before. Home. She was finally, truly, completely home.